Blog Talk Radio, the world's largest online radio network.
Welcome, everybody, to a special midday edition of Punch Drunk Critics Live. I guess we can call it that. We're here for a special interview that we conducted with Matt Bondurant, Alexandria, Virginia native, who's one of our own, who wrote the book, The Wettest County in the World, an incredible novel based on his grandfather and his two great uncles, known as the Bondurant boys, who ran an illegal bootlegging operation in Franklin County, Virginia. And the book was a inspiration, the basis for the film Lawless, starring Tom Hardy, Shia LeBeouf, Gary Oldman, Guy Pearce. We talked about it last week. John, I know you're there. Yes, we talked about it last week. We were both big fans of the film. I was a huge fan of the novel, and was very, very happy to have a chance to talk to Matt about the film.
I really dig this Prohibition era stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No. What were you saying about Prohibition era stuff?
Oh, I really dig this Prohibition era stuff, like Public Enemies. I know it wasn't what we wanted to be in a movie, but anything with that Prohibition era, Great Depression era, gangsters, criminals, violence, it's great from that time.
It's a great time period, and there's a lot of things going on there. You have people in the country are struggling at that time. They're looking for heroes, and in a lot of cases they turn to people who aren't exactly the upper echelon of society to be their heroes, because they kind of stand defiant against the wave of change, which is really what the wettest county in the world was about being defiant as the world is changing all around you. And the film captures a little bit of that as well. But let's go into the interview with Matt Bondurant and listen to him talk about the process of making the film, his inspirations for it, and what his hopes for the movie are in itself. I wanted to tell you, I'm a huge fan of the book. I read it over the course of a vacation a few weeks ago, and it is an amazing story.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate it.
You were born in Alexandria, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, so you're right around where I was. Did the city influence you in any way? Did you always want to be a writer?
Not necessarily. No. I mean, I was a reader, a very strong reader, devout reader for my whole life growing up, and maybe being in Alexandria in the proximity to a lot of excellent public libraries. My mother was a big public library person, so we spent lots of time at the public library, basically. So I think I developed a real close relationship with literature more than anything else. It wasn't until much later when I really considered the possibility of being a writer.
Was that around the time you moved on to James Madison? Around that time, did the bug really hit you?
Yeah, well, maybe at the very end of my undergraduate career, really when I was in grad school, I went back to JMU to get my master's degree in literature, and at that point I was basically considering I was hoping to be a professor of literature. That's what was my main goal. But I'd been writing all through undergrad and poetry and mostly poetry but I took a workshop or two and just started to explore it more and started to get some positive feedback about it. And really it was right about that time when I was 25, 26 years old, I started to seriously consider the possibility of being a fiction writer.
This story, Wettest County in the World, such an amazing book. I call it a very muscular story. It's a very masculine sort of story. But it's so personal also. How did it come about? How did this particular story come about?
Well, about 20 years ago, my father started unearthing various documents, and he's just doing his own research on his family. And I started unearthing all these various documents about the involvement of his father and his brothers during the 1920s and 30s in the moonshine industry in Franklin County. And we all knew that they had been involved in it to some degree, but to the extent there were these various newspaper articles that talked about the Bondurant boys, like this sort of notorious group, and then then he found articles about how they were shot in Maggie Creek Bridge in December 1930, and that was and my father didn't even know that had happened. That his own, he didn't know that his own father had been shot like that. And so a variety of those kinds of things. Then combined with Forrest and the stories about him that I heard around that time, with about him getting his throat cut at the County Line restaurant, things like that. All just started to build until I had a series of anecdotes really, and interesting stories that were kind of linked on one level or another. And I was thinking about it and talking about it with friends, and it seemed interesting to me, but I hadn't really thought about putting it together until I was basically finished after my first novel, the third translation, Sold, was published. Right around that time, the court transcripts of the Great Moonshine Conspiracy Trial were published, and so I was able to look back and see and hear, my grandfather as a young man and his brothers talking about some of these incidents, which was a real sort of help to constructing a narrative. And at that point, I kind of, about 10 years ago, I realized, okay, this is a legitimate project that I could fictionalize and do in a novel form.
One of the things I really like about it is your descriptions of the moonshine itself. Did you try any of the moonshine? Did you take to it?
Sure. I had to do plenty of research for it. It's pretty powerful stuff, and it's not for everybody, but yeah, I tried some, and getting into the whole chemical process of it was very interesting for me, and how it's made, and the chemistry behind it, and and especially back then where things were a little more loose. Terrible things happened. People were poisoned all the time. It was dangerous stuff, and so I wanted to kind of replicate that feeling, that notion, and the way it affects Jack, for example, which in the book is pretty extreme.
Yeah.
But that's partly designed because I wanted to suggest, as it's pretty clear in several things, Jack is not cut out for the life of a gangster in the same way that his brothers were, and one of the things that sort of separates him is his sort of inability to handle this stuff, or let's just say that it affects him in a very dramatic way, and I just thought that was the interesting thing to work with.
One thing I wanted to ask you about was one of my favorite parts of the book that wasn't necessarily in the film was the Sherwood Anderson connection. How did that part of the book come about, and were you a little disappointed that it's not in the film as well?
Well, when I started doing some of the research, I discovered an article written by Sherwood Anderson about the Moonshine Conspiracy Trial in 1935, and then a little further digging into some of his work, discovered that he spent some time in the area right around that time. He was living in nearby Marion, Virginia, and had come in to Franklin County to investigate, and so and I started reading his journal, his memoirs, and where he talked about the area and other things, and I started reading all the rest of his work. I'd always been a big fan of Sherwood Anderson, and his Winesburg, Ohio, I think is a very important book, and it's a book that's not talked about as much as it should. And his story just seemed really interesting to me because this is the tail end of his career. He kind of had a tragic, kind of classic American story of early fame, and then slowly sort of degenerating into somebody that was fallen out of favor. And so when I thought that I could integrate him into the story as a kind of a witness or an outsider, probing around the edges, I was kind of almost thinking about Truman Capote's book In Cold Blood was kind of an influence. So when I heard they were going to take him out of the film, it was something I suspected would happen. I knew that they would have to simplify and dramatically reduce things, and so that seemed like and also because his timeline is different, so that would involve some cutting. Now, of course, it would have been great if they could have kept him in, but no, I guess I'm saying that I wasn't really surprised.
Would you ever consider doing, because Sherwood Anderson's a kind of a fascinating character on his own, would you ever consider doing something of a biopic or something like that on him?
You know, that's an interesting idea. I never thought about it. I had never thought about it. You know, I think that would be cool. You know, the only reason I would say probably not is I seem to be drawn to novel fiction projects and to that kind of story in which there's lots of historical material to work with. Would be a time-consuming and demanding thing, and I think it's a worthy project, and one that I would like to take up. But I have a feeling I'll be too caught up in the next novel.
Right. Did you get to spend a lot of time on the set during filming?
Just a couple days. They invited my dad and I to come down for a couple days. Yeah, it was a sort of a closed set, kind of a small set, and they were moving pretty quickly. You know, as an indie film, the budget wasn't particularly huge, and so no, it was cool to go down there for a couple days though.
So overall, how do you feel about the movie itself? Do you think it captures the spirit of your book pretty well? Are you happy with it?
Yeah, I think that Hilco and Nick Cave, were both very earnest and diligent about their attempts to remain true to the spirit of the book and the story as best they could, considering the medium they're working with in film. I think so. I think they did the best they could, and I think their intentions were right and honorable, and I think in the end it's a good movie. I think it's gonna work out.
All right. Well, I enjoyed the movie quite a bit, just as I loved the book as well. So, Matt, I thank you for calling in, and I'm sorry for all the technical problems we had. I hope we get a chance to talk to you again soon. Maybe if they adapt The Night Swimmer or something like that, we'll
there you go.
we'll have a chance to talk to you again.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot,
all
man.
Right.
Thank you again.
All right. Bye-bye.
And that, folks, was our interview with Matt Bondurant, of the writer of the source novel for the new movie Lawless. I guess you could see he's the writer of that movie too. Of course, when they adapt for screenplays, as you heard in the interview, they take some things out, add a couple things in, just because books are written to be played inside your head, and those things don't always play out well on screen if they're not adapted correctly. So what I can tell you is that this one was adapted perfectly. We're going to be talking about it on Sunday's show, Sunday nights at 7. For anybody that's just tuning into us now, we do a weekly show, Punch Drunk Critics Live, where we do all our reviews, we air our biggest interviews, things like that. So make sure to check us out then. But if you're looking for an early tip on whether to see Lawless this week or not, I think it's a definite yes from both of us. I am speaking for Travis here, but it's kind of what you. I don't want to say it's what you wanted Public Enemies to be, because it's a totally different story, but it's kind of the same vein and the same era. So if you wanted to see that kind of hyper violence and intrigue and badass dudes doing what they do best, you'll definitely like this one. Tom Hardy, it just knocks another one out of the park, if you ask me. That guy could do no wrong. Is probably one of the few stars over the last couple of years that actually lived up to the hype he was getting before all his movies came out. If you remember, that tells you how popular they are, because I don't even remember the names anymore. But like Sam Worthington, for instance, who's still getting work, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whenever it was, he had Terminator Salvation coming out, Avatar. He had tons of stuff coming out. He was going to be the next big thing. And then this year, I remember the other guys, Taylor Kitsch, who had Battleship, and John Carter. I mean, two gigantic movies. Unfortunately, they both tanked. And who knows if we'll hear from those guys again. But Tom Hardy is one that has delivered every time. If you want to see some of his early work, there's a movie called Bronson that's available on Netflix Instant you can check out. But I've taken enough of your time. I'm rambling on and on. Make sure to check us out Sunday night at 7 for our full reviews of Lawless and all the other weekend releases that are coming out. And check out Lawless yourself this weekend. Trust me, I guarantee you won't be disappointed. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Again, look for us every day at www.punchdrunkcritics.com. Sunday nights at 7, or anytime in podcast format on blogtalkradio.com/punchdrunkcritics. Sundays at 7 is live. You can chat with us on the text chat. You call in, do whatever you want to do. We are open to all of that. So thanks again for tuning in. Have a good weekend, guys. Enjoy your Labor Day, and we'll see you on Sunday. Thanks.
Blog Talk Radio, where millions of hosts and listeners gather.